The battle at Wounded Knee was very important in the fate of the Sioux Nation. It was only a smaller portion of many battles. These battles were between the Sioux Indians and the Americans. When gold was rumored to be in the Dakotas, more specifically the Black Hills, it was inevitable that the Sioux would be removed from their land in one way or another. There were many land agreements to the Sioux Nation. Each one of the agreements made their land smaller and smaller. In 1868, they had more than half of South Dakota. In 1876, the U.S. took a lot of the east land in South Dakota. In 1889, there was about 1/3 of the land that they had in 1868. In the Battle of Little Bighorn, the United States Army was slaughtered. The battle occurred on June 25th and 26th of 1876. Sitting Bull led the Northern Cheyenne and Lakota to one of the greatest victories against the American army for them. Sitting Bull trapped American soldiers. His men kept firing at Americans. After a while, Sitting Bull said, "Let them go," because he knew if he killed all the Americans, they would be back with a bigger army. The American generals at the battle were Reno and Custer, who both died. The 7th Cavalry fought here but lost 268 men and 55 men wounded. After this battle, the American army was relentlessly in pursuit of the Indians. After the battle, Sitting Bull heard of another army coming, so the next day, Sitting Bull moved to the Bighorn Mountains to celebrate and to have wounded recover. The Indians left the prairie on fire. In 1890, the Sioux were offered multiple treaties in which they would lose land but receive money from Americans. The first treaty that the Sioux were offered that year was 50 cents per acre. The Sioux had 11 million acres of land that the Americans wanted. This would give the Sioux $5.5 million. After the Sioux declined that first offer, saying that they wanted to leave the land how it was, they were offered another deal a few months later. This offer was for $1.25 per acre, which would give them $13.75 million. But at the time, the commanding general was Nelson A. Miles. He was the last general of the U.S. Army with the title of commanding general. Nelson A. Miles made many decisions. He appointed James W. Forsyth to command the 7th Cavalry. James was one of the ones who were in charge at Wounded Knee. Red Cloud was a leader of the Sioux, and after Sitting Bull's very persuasive speech on not to buy into the reservation treaty, Red Bull declined the offer and decided that Sitting Bull was still in his right mind. Charles Eastman was a man who grew up as a Sioux Indian. He was taken away when he was just a boy. He went to high school and then helped negotiate on a reservation treaty. He also became a medicine man for the Sioux, and after he learned of the terrible things that the Americans were doing to the Sioux, he did his best to prevent them. Charles Eastman was one of the few people who helped delay contact between the American Army and the Sioux. The Dawes Act of 1887 was established to split up the Sioux into 7 separate reservations: Cheyenne River Agency, Crow Creek Agency, Lower Brule Agency, Rosebud Agency, Sisseton Agency, Yankton Agency, and Pine Ridge Agency. At these lands, the Sioux were promised to get enough food to eat. The food that they received was rotten meat. They were told to farm if they wanted, more food, even after they were promised enough food for everybody. Along with all these issues, the Sioux began to get diseases such as whooping cough, pneumonia, and others. Most of these patients could not be cured due to a lack of medicine. An inspirational leader, Sitting Bull, was the leader of the Hunkpapa, spoke his word to the Americans of how they broke promises and future generations would not be able to live off of what they were being offered. Although they were offered a lot of money, Sitting Bull still knew that it would not be enough for generations to survive off of. If it were not for him, then the Sioux would have to accept an offer that would set them back in years to come. The Americans were not very happy with Sitting Bull. They would have been able to take over the land and be able to dig for gold in the Black Hills. On December 15th, 1890, at 5:30 a.m., 39 police officers and 4 volunteers headed towards Sitting Bull's house. They arrested him and told him that the Indian Affairs agent wanted to speak with him. Sitting Bull refused, and the police had to use force on him. A Sioux man known as Catch the Bear was enraged and shot one of the police officers in the chest. Soon after, a policeman fired and shot and killed Sitting Bull. A fight broke out, and before it was over, 6 policemen were killed immediately, and 2 more died shortly after the fight. Sitting Bull and 7 of his supporters lay dead, along with 2 horses. Spotted Elk took over after Sitting Bull died. One of the greatest religions among the Sioux Indians was the ghost dance. The ghost dancers performed a religious dance. In the ghost dance, Indians tried to make dead come back alive. Americans misinterpreted this dance to be a war dance and felt threatened by it. The 7th Cavalry were the ones who were defeated at Little Bighorn. Under the command of Nelson A. Miles, they were seeking revenge. Nelson A. Miles put James W. Forsyth in charge of the 7th Cavalry so he could be in charge of the greater army. They were still infuriated by their major loss at Little Bighorn. This caused tension right before the massacre happened on December 29th. The Battle of Wounded Knee happened on December 29th, 1890. In the battle, the 7th Cavalry surrounded the Lakota with 4 Hotchkiss guns. The Indians woke up and were told by Americans to surrender their arms. Some Indians hid their guns, and some handed them to the cavalry. One deaf man named Black Coyote did not hear the order to give up his firearms and would not do so. Some men decided to use force, and when his gun shot into the air, another man named Yellowbird threw dust into the air, and that signaled an attack. In the first volley, nearly half of the Indians were killed because they were at such a close range. The Hotchkiss guns were capable of rapid fire and did major damage to the Sioux. The Indians that had hidden their weapons attacked, but soon fell back. The soldiers ran across the field, and some mounted horses and pursued Indians, sometimes for miles at a time. 150 Lakota died. 25 troops died. Most troops died from friendly fire. After the battle, there was a 3-day snowstorm. The bodies could not be taken off the field because of the snowstorm. When the bodies were taken off, not all could be identified, so most were put into a mass grave.